Victor Hugo was right when he said there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Yes, the idea of freedom, liberty, and justice for all. Yes, that was the idea, but I declare that now is the time. And if America is going to have a chance at living out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, then we cannot afford for this nation or its leaders to have selective ambition.
Welcome back to the Policy Lowdown, the podcast from the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, offering straight talk on the policy choices that shape Maryland communities. I'm your host, Kevin Slayton. We've had several past episodes about Maryland's budget and budget process. What we haven't talked as much about are some of the unique ways and perspectives that legislators approach the budget process. This year, the state budget will come in somewhere around $67 billion. That's a lot of money. While a great deal of those monies will go toward education, health, and transportation, I'm curious as to how it can ultimately impact individual groups, particularly based on race and ethnicity. As we pause to celebrate Black History Month, we want to hear from a few of the state's African-American leaders and how they approach this budget process. Maryland has approximately 30% of its residents who identify as African-American, and clearly it's a great state to be Black, to reside, and to live while being Black. Its finances outside the budget approval process are significant to how we live. So I'm excited today to be joined by our guests on this episode, again dedicated to Black History Month. I'm very excited to welcome my guests to tell us more about their important roles. Up first is Delegate Jazz Lewis. He represents the 24th District in Prince George's County, Maryland. He served this office since 2017 and is currently serving on the House Appropriations Committee, while also serving as the Majority Whip. Delegate Lewis, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. I've been a fan of the center for some time, and this is my first time being invited to the Policy Lowdown, and hopefully not my last.
Definitely, we will have you back, my man. Let's see, where do we start? I imagine for most of our listeners, I'm not sure if they know what a Majority Whip is. Mm-hmm. What is that?
It's a person who runs around assaulting people. No, but seriously, it is a role that comes from the parliamentary system in England that we inherited at the start of our country. The whip is the person who counts the votes. So normally before we bring any policy proposal to the floor of the House of Delegates to be voted on, we want to make sure that we have enough votes for the majority party who's in control to carry the day. Otherwise, we typically won't bring it. We don't whip on every issue. We tend to whip only on the issues that pull at the heartstrings, that may divide areas of our caucus, or things that are just hard, like voting on taxes or cuts to the budget. I've been in this role since 2023. I was the Democratic caucus chair prior, but it's been a great honor to serve as a whip to this body.
So I hope folks are listening and paying attention. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I think our community should be very proud to know that you are serving not just in that role as a leader, but excellently in that role.
Thank you.
The budget, T.I., the rapper, says in a song, if it ain't about the money, it ain't about nothing. Mm-hmm. Not that I know who T.I. is. I've just heard that song before. The one mandate the legislature has is that you can't get out of here until you balance the budget. So why should people care about the state budget?
Yeah, the first reason you should care about the state budget is because it's your tax dollars. All of it, through some way or another, is tax revenue from somebody for some purpose. Some of it is federal money coming through that's passed through, normally to what we call special funds. But the bulk of the budget that we're going to be talking about this session is our general fund. So that is the money that your personal income tax goes to, that the vast majority of your property tax goes to, that the sales tax goes to, and it goes to services to help you when you come on hard times. I like to think of the purpose of government is to increase the quality of life for all of its citizens. And that really means that when you're on hard times, you want your state government to have the infrastructure to actually help you, as opposed to telling you you're on your own. And right now we have a $2 billion budget cut that's been proposed because we had a deficit of $3 billion. So the governor had to propose a budget that we are now responding to, with $2 billion in cuts and about $1.4 billion in revenue proposals. He tried to be fair. I will give him that. In the cuts being proposed, being across all of state government, and proposing revenue, not just regressive measures such as an increase of the sales tax, but also progressive measures of such as asking those who have done well, particularly adjusted gross income of over $500,000 or more, to pay a little bit more. We are just beginning the process now of evaluating what those changes may mean to program delivery for education, for public safety, for maintaining our infrastructure, clean waters, maintaining our airport and the port of Baltimore, let alone paving the roads to your house, and much, much more.
As you think about that, historically, particularly with it being Black History Month, oftentimes when things have to sort of be readjusted or repositioned, it has historically been to the detriment of people of color. You are fortunate in a way that most legislators around the country who look like you are not. You actually represent one of the wealthiest African American counties on the planet, gorgeous Prince George's.
That's right.
How do you bring your community's voice and perspective to your work as it relates to the budget?
Yeah. I look at the programs, which programs are going to get hit and how are they going to get hit, particularly ones that are, I know, utilized in my community. Transportation is one of them. I looked to what funding was going to be present for WMATA, not just because it is the transit system for the Washington suburbs, but because 80% of WMATA's workforce lives in Prince George's County. The bus drivers, in addition to the rail drivers, the mechanics and techs who fits the buses and the rail cars, all lay their head largely in my district, but definitely in my county. So when people talk about making cuts to WMATA, they don't understand that a lot of the equipment costs are fixed. So the only thing that is variable that someone can then try to cut is on behalf of the workers. And those workers, as I just gave you those numbers, as you can imagine, is disproportionately people of color, specifically Black people. I looked at how much of the cost burden for particularly programs that have a split of state and local responsibility is going to go on to my county. We are already having our own fiscal challenges that we are trying to deal with. So, we see some of that cost burden going on to the localities, and then also try to see if there's going to be any flexibility in our localities being able to either raise revenue, right? Or if some of the strategic investments the states are making to grow the economy are going to be located in jurisdictions like gorgeous Prince George's, so that it can offset this burden that's now being pushed onto the localities as well. Education is another one. So we are the second largest LEA, or education system, in the state. But when you look at the total number of students who lay their head in a high poverty neighborhood, we're the highest, okay? Not as a percentage, but as in total number of literal mouths or beds, you think about it that way. So some of the changes to the blueprint, we're taking a very deep look at those cuts specifically, because we know that, those kids who are coming from some of these challenged neighborhoods, these kids and family members who need additional support, whether that's behavioral support, maybe that is developmental support, maybe that's support, workforce-related support for their family through community schools models and the like. We know that it will disproportionately affect our jurisdiction. So changes to that formula that funds that, we're taking a very close look as well. So sorry for the longer response.
No.
But, I wanted to give you a little bit of how we start to think about things. And we also think about when we're trying to do pro-growth investments to grow quantum or AI or aerospace. We try to see where those investments are going to cluster in the physical world, right? Is it going to just lead to more people who are winning more by allowing it to cluster in, let's say, Bethesda or Columbia? From a state budget perspective, so long as people in the state are winning, that's revenue. But as I think most of your listeners and most Marylanders would imagine, we want us to equitably grow and equitably win across the state, whether it's Baltimore City, Prince George's, or some of our developing rural areas like Western Maryland, Eastern Shore, or Southern Maryland as well.
That's a lot to try and weigh. Do you have a particular thing that's most important on your personal radar as it relates to sort of what's important to you based on your background? Is there something that sort of falls in that category based on how you've sort of thought through it with your colleagues from your district or other people of color across the state? How do you determine what that thing is for you?
Yeah. It varies. So, one thing I'll tell you about being a black legislator, you don't get the opportunity to just focus on one policy issue.
Of course.
Right? That's a luxury we don't have, If I wanted to just focus on climate change, for example, I don't get that choice.
Yeah.
Okay? I got to focus on education. I got to focus on workforce. I got to focus on the criminal justice system, transportation, you name it. But for me, the way I'm not a new legislator, though I am a young one, fortunately, at least for a little while longer. And I look at the programs I've already gotten passed to see every year as the budget shifts where those programs are. So a program called the Health Equity Resource Community Initiative, which subsidizes health clinics, health practitioners locating in our high needs areas where there are not an abundance of providers. That's in both the urban tier and the rural tier. That actually survives this budget, which is great. I look at a program that I got implemented called the Maryland New Start Act, which is a program that trains formerly incarcerated individuals on entrepreneurship efforts. And then after they complete that program, they can be, by Department of Labor, they can be handed off to the Department of Commerce for a microloan program where they can get funding to start the ventures that they want, whether it's a last mile delivery company, a salon, you name it, right? That program did receive a cut, but it was not eliminated. It got essentially a haircut, and I'm glad that it survived because we know this community in particular is the formerly incarcerated community is more entrepreneurial than the population writ large. So putting that energy to good use, I'm glad the governor's team was able to see the value of that. But that's where we start as well. I'm focusing on a lot of the things that we've already gotten to accomplish in making sure that things that are delivering currently for our communities aren't disproportionately harmed, particularly before we start proposing new programs on top of what we're still trying to deliver currently.
I want to thank my guests today for joining me. Delegate Lewis, how can folks reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you?
Sure. You can reach out to my office, jazzlewis.com. You can, of course, find me on the Maryland General Assembly website, or you can contact me via social media at Jazz for Maryland, I think on Instagram or X, I think as we call it now, and I'm soon to set up a Blue Sky, since that's what we're doing.
We're also glad to be joined by Maryland State Senator Corey McCray. Senator McCray represents the 45th District of East Baltimore and is a leader on the Senate side Budget and Tax Committee. Welcome to the show, Senator McCray.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We're going to dive right in, following up on Delegate Lewis's response. We're talking about the budget is some $67 billion. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the legislature does not resolve its matters here in these 90 days until it's handled the budget.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to first, before we do that, introduce yourself and sort of what your main interests are here in the legislature.
All right, I was going to say, my guy, he had me jump right in. But for those that may not know me, as the good Reverend stated, I'm Corey McCray. I represent East Northeast Baltimore in the Maryland State Senate, District 45. I'm a son of Baltimore. I graduated from Fairmont Hartford High School, right there at Hartford in 25th. I'm an electrician by trade out of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, so I went through a 5-year apprenticeship program. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been purchasing homes up and down the Bel Air Road corridor since I was the age of 20. I got my training wheels in the House of Delegates. I'm currently serving in my second term in the Maryland State Senate. And your question is very on time in reference to the $60+ billion budget. I serve as one of 13 members that sit on the Budget and Taxation Committee, and that is probably one of the most important things that I could be doing at this moment, because when we're talking about just equity and services, this is so important, making sure that our communities, Kevin, our communities are reflective in that document that we call the budget.
Why should people, particularly, I'm being transparent, I'm a member of the 45th District. But in particular, this Black History Month, why should Black people care about the state budget?
You know what? When I think about people like Clarence Blount, when I think about people like Verda Welcome, and I think about who I preceded, Senator Nathaniel McFadden, like when we think about Black history, that's Maryland's history, and we should never forget that. And the shoulders that we stand on are very strong. We should be protective of that history, but more importantly, the work that we do at this moment is so important, because just how we're standing on their shoulders, that next generation of leaders have expectations of us and making sure that we deliver so that they can have a successful future.
That's excellent. How do you bring your community's voice and its perspectives into the budget? The work you do on the budget.
So one of the things that I try my best to do is I try to stay on the ground. And I'll talk to you just about my last 72 hours, brother. When I think about Career Academy, and I went to visit there just this past Wednesday before I got to Annapolis for 1030 hearings, being able to understand the needs, give access, exposure to our young folks, and letting them know I'm accessible. You can touch me, you can reach me, and let me know how you need to get to me. This past Monday, I went to the William S. Baird School. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's right down the street from your house. I just thought about on Coppin. But when I think about the William S. Baird School, I wasn't as familiar with it. But they're a public school that services our DD community. And when I went into that school, Reverend, and I get to see Cam, when I met with their Student Government Association, when I got to see my guy Cam, who's the treasurer that's elected at the respective school, and he talked and was filled with joy, because we're not supposed to be servicing some people. Our job is to make sure, how are we inclusive of all people? So like those moments like that is so important, because you're touching people that are closer to the problem. And that's how I take that lived experience to the budget and making sure that I'm thinking about these things as we're crafting that $60+ billion.
That's interesting. The state is facing budget challenge this year. How are you approaching the tough decisions that you're going to have to make this session?
I approach them slow, methodically, and thoughtfully. I think that, I try my best not to panic. The governor just introduced the budget. I think that there were a number of folks that were, in arms about some of the things that they said. There were a number of folks that were excited about some of the things that they saw within the budget. But as we deal with that $3 billion deficit, and it impacts real people, as we deal with that $3 billion deficit, $3+ billion deficit, we have to be mindful and thoughtful of folks that may be getting DD services, because that's about $500 million in cuts.
Development disability.
Yes, sir. Is the development disability. The second thing is I think about just education. So we look at these concentration of poverty dollars and who they impact. We know that they impact our Black young scholars, brown young scholars from that sample. So that's very central to me. Like, I know that will be one of my priorities, the restoration, because we cannot pause something like that. But we have to be thoughtful. We have to bring everybody to the table, and then we have to show leadership. At the end of the day, advocates' job is to advocate. But at the end of the day, leaders have to make tough decisions and be thoughtful in doing so and making sure that we're bringing along that next generation, but also protecting those that need to be protected. And I'm talking about our senior, our children, and those folks with disabilities.
Interesting. Last question. What is the one thing that you think is most important for your constituents and Marylanders in general to know about to know about the state budget?
That this is the people's house. And at the end of the day, we work for them. Our job is to serve. We are elected to serve the folks that put us in this space. And I want everybody to know that if you shoot an email, you should get a response back, and you will get a response back if you reach out to Corey McCray. And if there is an issue that's very relevant to you, I read every email. It's not somebody else looking through it. It's myself on that other end, because that's another opportunity for me to get a granular level understanding of how things are impacting. It's no way that we can read 2,000 bills. But one of the things is that I have a responsibility when one of my constituents reach out to me about a bill. You know what I do? I go and look it up. I see how they and understand how they said it would impact them, and then get a level of interpretation of what that bill does and whether it would adversely or advantageously impact them. So please use the vehicles that you have, not just from a Facebook or Twitter, but like I said, come to Annapolis, send us an email, make that phone call, because your voice is the one that I'm looking to hear. I don't want to be diluted with folks with money, folks with access, and know how to navigate the system. I want to get to my people.
Yes, well, we're glad to have Delegate Lewis and Senator McCray. We're equally as excited to have Gabriel Acevero, who serves in the House of Delegates. He's on the Appropriations Committee, and he's been very active and outspoken about issues that are impacting folks who are on the margins. I think when it comes to the budget, Delegate Acevero, I'm really interested. Well, before you do that, tell us more about yourself and the district that you represent.
Sure. I'm Delegate Gabriel Acevero. I'm proud to represent the people of Maryland's 39th Legislative District, which is the northwestern part of Montgomery County, includes the communities of Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, Germantown, Clarksburg, and Washington Grove. Very working class district. District 39 is one of the most diverse districts in our state. And I think it's really emblematic of our state as a whole, not just in terms of diversity, but in income, in terms of the community of people that live in District 39.
Well, here we are. It's the governor submitted his budget, some $67 billion. At last check, the African or people of color, African American population in the state is somewhere around 30%. It's almost $22 billion if you look at it that way. You serve on appropriations. Why should people of color care about the state budget?
Well, not to sound cliche, but it is true. A budget is a moral document, but it's also a strategic one as well. And so when we talk about what kind of a state that we want to live in, and what kind of a future we want to have for not just our kids, but the future generation, we have to talk about the budget, because too often we hear in government the use of words such as fund, defund, and refund. And whenever we're using terms like fund or defund, we're essentially talking about budgets. And whether it's defunding public education, which we've seen in a number of other states, as well as some attempts here, whether we're talking about defund the police, or whether we're talking about funding disabilities, funding social services and transportation infrastructure, we're talking about the budget essentially. And so this is about where our tax dollars, our money goes. And if we don't pay attention, this is how money leaves our community. This is how money doesn't get to the most vulnerable within our community. And it's also the reason why we see investments in other places, but not necessarily investments that may be closer to home. Budgets are essentially a statement of what people are going to do with our dollars. And just like how you pay attention to what an investor or to what some other individual or group is doing with your money, that same energy has to be placed on states and local budget, because it's your money. And this is essentially people telling you what they're going to do with your money.
You represent a very unique district, quite possibly one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in all of the United States. Yet and still, there's always poverty that exists. There are people who are struggling. How do you bring that community, your community's voice, to your personal perspective towards the work on budget?
Montgomery County is one of the most wealthiest counties in America. It ranks in the top 10 every year. But as I like to remind people, that while I represent a district or an area in Montgomery County, that wealth that you're talking about, that we see coming from Montgomery County, or that resides in Montgomery County rather, that's really pockets of wealth surrounded by really a number of folks who are struggling to make ends meet. And so I like to remind people that it's not pockets of poverty in a very wealthy county, but it's pockets of wealth in a county that really is working class, where folks are, trying to make ends meet and sometimes having challenges as it relates to that. And so Montgomery County, while we are the economic engine for the state, we do have people who are struggling. We do have people who aren't making enough in order to afford to live in our county, and really, by extension, our state. And so I try to remind people of that, because it's very easy to think that Montgomery County is this white picket fence where it's predominantly white and affluent, and when in actuality is majority people of color, Black, Latino, and Asian American and Pacific Islanders make up the demographic majority. And we have pockets of wealth. We have people who, quite frankly, can and should be paying their fair share and are not.
That's an excellent point. The state is facing some serious challenges this year. How are you going to approach the tough decisions on your committee as it relates to sort of being mindful of the impact on people of color?
Absolutely. I serve on the House Appropriations Committee, which oversees our state's capital and operating budget. And we are the people responsible for what I said earlier, basically stating how we're going to spend your tax dollars. And I think it's also important to note that while I represent an affluent jurisdiction, I also happen to live in a state, that is Maryland, that is the richest state in the union per capita. And so what we are looking at this year with fiscal year 2026 is a $3 billion budget deficit. Governor Moore released his 60-something billion dollar budget, which he presented to the General Assembly. And so we're working through that now. And part of that budget that the governor presented included $2 billion in cuts. And we have to figure out essentially how to balance that budget, which we're constitutionally bounded to do. All states, we cannot run a deficit. We cannot go over in terms of what we spend versus what we take in. But what it means then that we have to find not just creative ways, but we have to look at like a progressive approach to our state's tax code. Maryland is one of the states that have a regressive tax code, meaning people who can and should be paying more and not paying their fair share. And we can do something about that, right? Too often when we look at budget deficits, we give people this false choice, either cuts and austerity, right? Or cuts in services. Which do you prefer, right? And I think it's a false choice when we think of Maryland, and especially in the context of the United States, one of the wealthiest countries in human history. We have the money We just don't have the political will to be able to pass the legislation that will get us the revenue that we need to not only pay for these social service programs that people rely on, but to also invest in our future, because we need funds in order to invest. And we don't have that right now for a number of reasons, whether it's, corporations not paying their fair share, whether it's wealthier Marylanders paying less in income taxes compared to working class Marylanders, or whether it's inheritance and estate tax wealth that people are able to pass down without any kind of a tax being levied. So we have a lot of work that we need to do to not just balance the budget, but I think this is the year, especially if we are concerned about Black and brown communities, the communities who often get the shorter end of the stick when it comes to budget. If we really care about Black, Latinx communities, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Indigenous communities, then we should be looking at ways of bringing more funds, more revenue into our state coffers. And we could do that. We have policy solutions in order to do that. We just need courage. We need the political will for folks to act on it.
Excellent, excellent. In your capacity as an elected delegate down here, do you know, or has there ever been, or is there a space where particularly members who are within the Black Caucus sort of come together and have these conversations amongst themselves about how these decisions can sort of impact? And then just lastly, what advice would you give folks who are sort of watching from the outside, and sort of what is it that they need to know about the budget?
I think working class, Black working class folk, like, working class folks more generally understand that they're being screwed. Mm-hmm. We are living in an economy that is tilted in favor of wealthier individuals and against those who are working poor. And I say working poor intentionally, people who are employed, who get paid. And for some reason, what they're being paid or how much they're earning is not enough, to be able to see upward mobility, right? And then you have working class folks who are making a decent wage, but are also finding a hard time living in our state. And so there's a lot that we can and should be doing. I'll give an example. I introduced a bill this legislative session around property taxes and assessments for private country clubs and golf courses. Right now, you see private country clubs and golf courses taking advantage of our tax code as it relates to open and green spaces. And so what they are now doing, and what they've been doing for a very long time, is taking advantage of that tax to the tune of millions, where, money that they would otherwise be paying, they're not, because their private country clubs and golf courses are seen as open and green spaces, but they're not publicly accessible. They're only accessible if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay membership. And so entities like private country clubs and golf courses should be paying their fair share, as well as individuals. We should be looking at the inheritance and estate tax. We should be looking at combined reporting. And we should also be looking at other areas of our tax code where people take advantage, and money that we would otherwise be getting that we're not getting right now, that we're fixing that, because we are in a crunch right now. Right? I wouldn't say we're in a crisis, but we're certainly in a crunch as it relates to our budget. And this is the year that we really have to, tilt or even the playing field, if you will, so that working class folks are able to afford to live. They're able to get the services that they rely on, and the revenue that we need in order to pay for that. We can do that by whether it's the Fair Share Act, whether it's my bill, whether it's around the inheritance and estate tax. But there are ways in which that we can, ensure that whether it's redistributing or getting to a point of an equitable tax code, we have that responsibility, to do that. And that is a big challenge for us this year. But my hope is that it would, really have people thinking for once about how we change our tax code so that it's more equitable, especially in a state, we are a democratic state where we look at some other neighboring jurisdictions that are changing their tax code in a way that brings in revenue. And as far as what advice I'd give to folks on the budget process, I would say just as you pay attention to bills that are introduced and that are being heard, we have to pay attention to how and where our money is spent. Politics, quite frankly, is about who gets what, when, where, and how, right? And the budget process is indicative of that. Who gets the funding, when they get the funding, how they get the funding, and where they get the funding. All of those things we and other state legislatures, cities, counties, and even our federal government deal with, right? And so we have to pay attention because this is our tax dollars and it should be used to reinvest in our communities, reinvest in the things that work so that we're helping those most vulnerable in our community. So I would just encourage everyone to just be engaged. Like civic engagement goes beyond legislation. It goes beyond just the spectating and the voting. You now have to hold people's foot to the fire so that they're spending your money in the right way, so that we're prioritizing the right things. Because we hear from a lot of people, and if we don't hear from folks who are really struggling, it's very easy for my colleagues and other folks to overlook their pain. And so I would just encourage folks to be engaged in the process, know where your tax dollars are going, and sign up to testify at budget hearings so that your tax dollars are going in a place and being allocated in a way that's meaningful.
Wow, it is refreshing to have this conversation with you, Delegate. I appreciate you for taking time out to share with us on this podcast. I look forward to following up with you later on in the session. Your constituents should be honored to have you represent them. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Those that will stand up, call our nation back toward justice and righteousness are often bashed or labeled as socialist and unpatriotic. Many are labeled as instigators and rebel wild